Hello, I'm Tess Duckworth,
Justin Douglas,
and Madison Downs.
and our presentation is about the short story Odour of Chrysanthemums by David Herbert Lawrence.
without further ado, we will continue on to the next slide.
This is Tess Duckworth reading the slide D.H. Lawrence background. He was born September 11, 1885 in Eastwood, Nottinghamshire, England, to parents John Lawrence and Lydia Beardsall. His parents struggled in their marriage. John was a coal miner and Lydia yearned to leave the mining district. But in 1910, his mother eventually died of cancer, just shortly after his first novel, The White Peacock, was published. This left a huge impact on Lawrence and inspired the character Miss Morrel in her novel Sons and Lovers. He started his career with intense poems of nature and society, where he struggled with censorship. Lawrence was often considered radical and offensive, criticizing conventional Anglo-Saxon society and believing sex, primal thinking, and peace of nature as cures for modern-day industrialization of society, which he thought to be evil. His works were widely controversial, and collections like Pansies were actually banned in England. He left England after being persecuted for pro-German sympathies during World War I. He was accused because of his German wife, Frida, and he had to flee. They traveled tirelessly across the country and eventually ended up in New Mexico. He actually ended up in the center of a group of female admirers who considered themselves his disciples, and their fights over his attention became literary legend during the time. He also died of tuberculosis in France, 1930, at the age of 44, after struggling with the disease for years.
This is Justin Douglas reading the slide Other Major Works. His novels include Lawrence is best known for his novels. These include Sons and Lovers, published in 1913, a complicated story of a man who can't form lasting relationships because of his mother. It ties together themes of life and death as his emotionally conflicting mother dies and he finds he cannot connect with other women afterwards. It is also based closely with the author's personal life and the grief he felt with his own mother when his own mother died of cancer. The Rainbow, published in 1915, the Brangwyn family struggles with industrialization of their rural farm, personal fulfillment, and society roles. Like his other works, Lawrence focuses on the relationships between man and woman and the struggles of finding fulfillment in marriage. It also has strong themes of feminism, including Ursula's unconventional gender role, possibly reflecting Lawrence's own struggle with personal freedom. Woman in Love, published in 1920, focuses on two sisters' complex relationship and their romantic experiences. The women struggled with their love interests, constraints on their lives, eventually leading to their part. Ursula and Rupert represent Lawrence's relationship with his own wife and the novel's bitterness and a result of World War I, which Lawrence experienced firsthand. Lady Chatterley's Lover, published in 1928, follows Lady Chatterley, who's married to a distant wealthy man and finds happiness with a poor gamekeeper. It explores class expectations of the author's time, and the importance of meaningful relationships, which Lawrence apparently struggles with, seen in most of his works. Some poetry includes Pansies, published in 1929, a series of poems covering a range of themes such as deep emotional conflict, sex, and strong grudges. Pansies is Lawrence's best-known collection of poems. While the title appears to be about flowers, the word actually comes from the French word pensies, which means thoughts, as the collection is a form of biographical representation of Lawrence's opinion on life. Nettles, published in 1930, a series of poems involving his critiques over society, government, and the modern age. Lawrence highly despised contemporary society and believed in the downfall of man was the shift away from a natural world which, in his mind, decreased vitality. The title is a contrasts with beautiful flowers such as roses to show this decay in modern society.
This is Tess Duckworth reading the slide summary. The day is growing darker as a train passes through town slowly. A tall woman, later known as Elizabeth, calls for her stubborn son, John, urging him to come inside. He of course doesn't want to, but is convinced anyways with his mother's strong attitude. As the boy walks along the path, he pulls at the chrysanthemums where several flowers scatter on the ground. He gets yelled at for this and shushed away, but Elizabeth pulls a sprig off, smells it, and tucks it into her apron band. Watching the miners walk home from their porch, the train stops at her gate, and the conductor, her father, asks for a cup of tea, which she fetches, along with bread and butter as well. He starts to apologize for not visiting and explains that he got married again, but she already knows this. She criticizes his remarriage, and he defends himself, saying no man should sit by the hearth alone. He then criticizes her husband's spending at the pub, which she bitterly agrees with, knowing it's more than likely true, which the readers learn more about further in the story, before retreating back inside the house, leaving her father to steer away. Inside, tea is prepared and food is set, but it grows cold as her husband doesn't show. Then the daughter, Annie, comes home late, but she mentions that the lanterns had not even been lit outside yet, and that her father was not home, nor has she seen him when questioned. So is then asked to tend to the fire because Elizabeth bitterly comments that her husband Walter will think it is too cold when he comes stumbling in, which Annie's brother calls her slow for, leading to a fight that has to be broken up. The room then goes dark due to the newly added coals, so Elizabeth lights a lantern, revealing her pregnant belly. Her daughter spots the flowers in her apron band and goes to smell them, commenting how beautiful their fragrance is. But the mother just laughs and says that they no longer smell beautiful to her because they were there for her marriage, Annie's birth, and the first time her husband, Walter, was brought in drunk. The kids eventually tire and go to bed before their father comes home, which Elizabeth curses at him for making them so distressed, but she grows fearful with Walter's absence as she sews in her chair for hours. Her fears are confirmed when she goes to the messy neighbors, fellow miners, who sends the head of the house to go look for him, where they find Walter had been in a mining accident and is brought in dead. Walter's mother wails loudly against Elizabeth's shushing, and the men carrying his body wake the daughter from upstairs after they knock over the vase of chrysanthemums. But her mother tells her to go back to sleep and that her father is only passed out like usual, before replacing the vase of flowers. Then, she and Walter's mother clean his dead body, where she reflects on their marriage, feeling that there was no real connection between them, and her relationship with him makes her unborn child feel like ice in her womb. The story ends by her recognizing her new master in life as death instead of life.
This is Madison Downs reading the slide Historical Reference. The early 20th century working class conditions. In the late 19th and early 20th century, when Lawrence grew up, working class conditions were as poor as the people were. Families were overworked, underpaid, and often exposed to dangerous working environments. Lawrence grew up in a working class family, so he experienced this firsthand with his father and disapproving mother. The feminist movement. The feminist movement was up and coming during Lawrence's time, focusing on women's rights and protections. Raised most entirely by his mother, he was taught to respect women and advocate for them. Seen in the obvious injustice of Elizabeth in the story, that is meant to compel the reader to sympathize with her. Industrialization of the time. Industrialization was taking over everywhere. As Lawrence grew up, he saw firsthand the effects of industrialization on his rural village, and he was not pleased as more factories popped up and the community was splintered off by greedy industrialists. Rural coal mining in England and trade unions. Lawrence grew up in a small rural mining village of East England with his dad as a miner himself. During the time, working conditions were poor and miners grew angry. They started forming their own private trade unions, but quickly were radicalized and became a political issue across the country. Modernism and literature. Modernism was a key part of Lawrence's childhood and later a key element in his works. The movement became in the early 20th century, rejecting traditional styles and trading to focus more on the abstract, experimental, and subjective experiences of life for artistic flow of emotion, which Lawrence encompassed deeply into all of his pieces. D.H. Lawrence's mother's death. Lawrence's mom, Lydia Beardshaw, was one of his biggest influences apart from the natural world. Her death in 1910 severely rocked Lawrence. Her complicated character later inspired many characters, but specifically Elizabeth and Odour of Chrysanthemums, as he reflects his own mother's bad marriage and hardships raising him.
This is Justin Douglas reading the slide Fun Fact Story. The story setting is inspired by Lawrence's childhood growing up in a mining town. His father was a miner, and many aspects of from this experience growing up inspired elements like Elizabeth's father conducting a train through the small mining town at the beginning of the story, the hardship Elizabeth goes through with her husband, and the imagery where the miners walk home as the sun sets. It's one of Lawrence's earliest stories after his mother's death, which greatly influenced the characters in themes such as death, loneliness, and regret. Elizabeth is closely tied with the author's own mother, who resented her husband and the mining town they lived in, where she was unhappy and married to an unreliable drunkard until her husband died, leaving her independent and struggling to pay the bills. Walter's death in the story was influenced by Lawrence's father's friend, which was briefly mentioned in Lawrence's diary as he reflected on his childhood. Lawrence's characters in the story speak very similar to how people would naturally talk. This is because his stories are meant to reflect real life instead of being pieces which he is often criticized for not portraying reality in a way that would truly impact readers.
This is Madison Downs reading the slide Fun Facts author. He first started writing in 1905 and was published in the local newspaper in 1907 by Ford Madox Hoover, after being highly recommended by Jesse Chambers. Best known as a novelist, but poems influenced poets on both sides of the Atlantic. With his evocations of the natural world, his early poems highly reflected the influence of Ezra Pound and the Imagist movement, which reached its peak after the start of the 20th century. Pound wanted him to join his circle of writers, but Lawrence ended up in a more independent route. Lawrence's mother inspired his love of literature. He was well educated and encouraged his love of books through her own literary passion, and to rise above his working class upbringing. D.H. Lawrence spent the majority of his life traveling the world, visiting places such as Italy, Mexico, Sri Lanka, and Australia. Additionally, Lawrence also wrote 3 travel books, Twilight in Italy and Other Essays, Sea in Sardinia, and Mornings in Mexico. He got his teacher's certificate at University of Nottingham, where he then taught at Davidson Road School in Croydon, as well as Eastwood as a pupil teacher before eventually leaving to become a full-time author. Involved in some of the most famous censorship cases of the early 20th century. At the time, Lawrence and his writing were considered highly controversial and vulgar. He believed in the natural world's magic and pleasure, not just in the mind and soul, which he wrote about frequently. Several of his works were actually banned from England altogether, but this did not stop him from producing more obscene material and personal literary attacks toward government officials.
This is Tess Duckworth reading the slide Symbolism. Chrysanthemums. The flower represents the despair in Elizabeth's life as it is present at every major miserable event in her life, like marrying her husband and the birth of her children. which further represents her personal freedom and happiness being ripped away. It also represents the decay of Elizabeth's marriage. Death. Death is a prevalent symbol towards the end of the story. It ties into the sudden change in Elizabeth's life as her husband dies, but also her moral obligation to life. She mentions that before her master was life, but now she feels her true master is death. As the reader interprets, her husband's death will cause an extreme wake in her and her children's life, even though she never felt love for him. It also ties in with the flowers. As the more hours her husband is gone, the more the flowers wilt, representing his shift. Change. In the story, change is represented through the flowers' phases in the story from alive to wilting. At the beginning, the chrysanthemums are alive and growing on the bushes outside before Elizabeth rips one away to take inside. Throughout the night, the flowers are described as limp and browning as we learn why Elizabeth does not find the smell beautiful. When her husband is brought in dead, the vase is knocked over, which she replaces with a new set, representing the abrupt change in her life without her husband. Beauty. Annie, the daughter, finds the flowers beautiful, while her mother does not because of different life circumstances. This is partly because her daughter's innocence and a lack of connection and understanding between her family, which she slightly resents because of her forced society role, something Annie does not understand quite yet. Feminine role in society. The feminine role in society Elizabeth experiences in the story is being married to a man, being a housewife, and a mother. However, she does not accept these roles due to them forcibly pushed on her and the lack of personal freedom within the role. The reader sees her resentment at her family because of this, especially her husband.
This is Justin, and this is our works cited page. The flower on the introductory slide is from Adobe stock, and the photograph on the background slide is from Yale University. All other stock images are from PowerPoint's integrated free imaging system. Other citations are from credible sources from varying articles and universities.
This is Tess Duckworth
Madison Downs.
And Justin Douglas.
Thank you for watching our presentation.